If ever there was a country noted for its generosity, its warmth, its concern for the underdog, it has been the United States. Time after time, in moments of internal crisis, whether flood, famine, or economic distress, we have gone to the assistance of the poor and the underprivileged. Since our country's inception, we have worked to perfect a system that would offer the opportunity for peace, prosperity, and human dignity to all people. A war on poverty? Name a nation that has less poverty than the United States. We've been fighting the most successful war against poverty the world has ever known. And we've done it through the initiative gained from individual freedom, the strength of religious principles and faith, and an economic system based on the individual's willingness to work. For 2 centuries using this system, we have seen the unfolding and fulfillment of this American dream for more and more millions of people who have come to our shores from all over the world, seeking an opportunity to work as free men and to realize the benefits of that labor. Now our political leaders have embarked upon financing a multi-billion-dollar spectacular to completely eliminate poverty, a worthy goal. The show has been in production now since 1964. So far, the box office has cleaned up, but the patrons are beginning to complain. The poor are still poor, and the poor taxpayer is confused. What has this greatest show on earth produced with your tax money? In New York City, officials discovered poor people who said there was not sufficient heat in their apartments, and they were immediately put up at the Astor Hotel. Month after month, they enjoyed $9 a day individual food allowances plus 3-room suites, complete with maid service. In Los Angeles, the Travelers Aid Society was given $209,000 of tax money to maintain a 24-hour mobile unit to assist poverty-stricken people who find themselves lost on the Los Angeles freeways. At a Job Corps center in St. Petersburg, Florida, your taxes paid for a full-time swimming instructor at $8,160 and a full-time lifeguard at $6,000, and the Job Corps Center didn't even have a swimming pool. Tax money is being used to pay salaries to the free speech insurrectionists and left-wing beatniks at the University of California at Berkeley and other college campuses. While they are out busy filling the streets demonstrating against Vietnam, you are filling their pockets with tax dollars through the college work-study program. For a period of time, your taxes went to sponsor a black art repertory theater in Harlem directed by Leroy Jones, the playwright who has to his questionable credit such plays as The Toilet. Leroy Jones says, quote, "I see nothing wrong with hating the white man. He is a loathsome beast," unquote. The plays produced at your expense presented chalk-faced Negroes performing the roles of whites, frequently portrayed as homosexuals. An Associated Press release stated that in these plays the Negro was clearly giving vent to his hatred of whitey. The only response from Washington was, quote, "We'd rather see these kids fussing on the stage than on the streets." On March 17, 1965, United Press International reported, quote, "More than 50 policemen, led by New York's top uniformed officer, seized narcotics and weapons last night in a raid on a Harlem theater which federal officials said produces vile, racist plays. Chief Inspector Sanford Garelick said his raiding party also found a rifle range in the basement of the Black Arts Repertory Theater," unquote. When James E. McCarthy, Director of Mobilization for Youth, a New York anti-poverty agency, resigned in the heat of his wild and flagrant expense accounts, he was immediately rehired at $15,000 a year by Congressman Adam Clayton Powell to direct the national investigation of war on poverty programs, perhaps on the "it takes one to know one" basis. The list of experiments and expensive programs goes on, until eventually the taxpayer asks, unbelievingly, what on earth is happening? What is this war on poverty all about? Basically, the Economic Opportunity Act was designed by Great Society planners to combat the ills of poverty. Social planners like Michael Harrington, who denounced the free enterprise system, American culture, and God. Michael Harrington, in his book, The Other America, claims that many Americans are poor through no fault of their own and have no chance of doing anything about their poverty without government help. Michael Harrington was the man chosen to draft the War on Poverty program. What is poverty? It was decided that any American family of 4 living on less than $3,100 a year is in abject poverty, and an income of less than $5,000 equals deprivation. A college student qualifies as poverty-stricken if he comes from a home whose yearly income is less than $10,000. No consideration was taken as to regional differences, non-money income, or other factors. The next step was to decide where the newly defined poor were located. Washington warriors reasoned that scattered poverty is too difficult to deal with. At least that was the reason given to poverty-stricken West Virginia when it complained that the state anti-poverty allotment was only $400,000, while wealthy and populous New Jersey received $12.5 million. Considering that over half of our country's so-called poverty is in the rural areas, why have less than 10% of poverty funds found their way to such areas? Could someone have concluded that this war is best fought where the most votes are? With the enemy defined and located, generals to run the war fell neatly into place. Adam Clayton Powell, the Paris-loving nepotist and notoriously delinquent member of Congress, pinned 5 stars on his own shoulders with the words, quote, "I control all labor legislation, all education legislation, the manpower training and redevelopment program, vocational rehabilitation, and, of greater importance today, the war on poverty," unquote. This typically modest appraisal of his power is tragically close to the truth. As chairman of the House Committee on Education and Labor, he controls the purse strings of the war on poverty. This powerful congressman is the man who told his race, "Anything we get, we will have to fight for, to seize for ourselves. We will invade the white man's heaven, the United States," unquote. This is the congressman of whom New York State Supreme Court Justice Maurice Walls said, quote, "He's like a mackerel. He shines, but he smells to high heaven," unquote. And this is the congressman who controls the money and thus the direction of the war on poverty. Sergeant Shriver is the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, which administers the poverty war. An expert salesman with practically unlimited funds and authority, he has set up one of the most expensive propaganda machines Washington has ever seen, and that's saying quite a lot. His mushrooming bureaucracy supports 25 poverty generals who are paid more than General Westmoreland, who runs the war in Vietnam. 273 employees are receiving more than $17,000 a year each, not to mention directors and coordinators at the community level. Hundreds of consultants are hired full-time at $100 per day. The poverty empire is costing over $53.4 million in salaries alone. Mr. Shriver, however, glosses over all charges of extravagance, fraud, and corruption by rattling off elastic statistics that time and again have proven to be distorted and contradictory. The main battle plan in the war on poverty is implemented through the community action programs. These are programs where a group of unelected and untrained people get together, work out a way which they think poverty can be combated within their community, and then simply apply for federal tax money to finance their program. It is not required that the spending of this tax money be approved by the local city council, or the local county board of supervisors, or even the local school board. Locally elected government is deliberately and effectively bypassed. Congressman Don Clausen of California pointed this out when he said, quote, "One of the great dangers of this bill lies in the circumvention of local and state authorities," unquote. An independent theoretician in this poverty war is the brilliant strategist Dr. Saul Alinsky. His concepts of organizing the poor into effective power blocks permeate the entire community action program, which has adopted the slogan, "Of the poor, by the poor, and for the poor." His methods are distinctly spelled out in the first line of his book, Rules for Revolution. Machiavelli wrote The Prince to tell the haves how to keep it. This is a book to tell the have-nots how to take it away. Dr. Alinsky calls himself a professional revolutionist. He believes that the only way the poor will get anything from the government is by establishing a strength that can say either or else. The fight is in the streets in this revolution. We know one thing. We know that the only way a people get equality, the only way they get what is rightfully theirs, is when they have the strength or the power to come in and say either or else, unquote. Alinsky's tactics are simple. 1. Organize the minorities into effective political power blocks. 2. Fan complaints into critical issues. And 3. Apply the pressures of rent strikes, consumer pickets, school boycotts, demonstrations against alleged police brutality, and marches on City Hall, all in order to get that which is rightfully due. A KNX CBS editorial pointed out that if the 400,000 poor of Los Angeles were organized into a solid voting bloc, such a group would control politics and the spending of tax money in Southern California. By institutionalizing poverty nationwide, the administration has virtually assured itself of a solid voting bloc. As one example, in Syracuse, New York, Mayor William Walsh has charged that Alinsky's Syracuse group used $314,000 of anti-poverty money to conduct voter registration drives to get the poor to register as Democrats. HARU-ACT is the anti-poverty agency in Harlem, which has reportedly received over $100 million of your tax dollars to wage its war on poverty. Besides having misplaced close to $1 million, Shriver rushed an $800,000 retroactive appropriation to HARU-ACT to save it from collapse. It has become the militant civil rights organization referred to as just one more of Adam Clayton Powell's expensive little hobbies. Expensive, but how little. Involved in all the usual tax-financed militant demonstrations, school boycotts, and police brutality charges, HARU-ACT appears to have given birth to a group known as the 5%ers. This group believes that only 5% of the Negro race understands and is truly dedicated to the revolutionary struggle. 85% of the Negroes are content to be exploited, they say. 10% are exploiters themselves. That leaves the 5%ers, expertly trained in judo and karate, who apparently have managed to terrorize large parts of Harlem and have been successfully blackmailing city and federal politicians. Quote, "Continue to pour money into us through HARU-ACT," unquote, they say, "or else we will bring bloody revolution to the streets of New York." Even the militant civil rights director of HARU-ACT, Livingston Wingate, a close friend and former aide to Adam Clayton Powell, seemed frightened. He said, quote, "I've talked to the police. They're scared. They know the facts. If I tell too much, I'll be the late Wingate," unquote. It has been suggested that important politicians, state, city, and federal, have known about the blackmail, but for fear of igniting a riot, have gone along with it. One fact, though, is certain. Despite outright fraud, HARU-ACT continues to receive more and more money. This either-or-else technique has manifested itself throughout the whole philosophy of the Community Action Program. Either you give us the programs we want, or there will be rioting, bloodshed, and a cost to the taxpayers that is unbelievable. And the blackmail is working. The U.S. Civil Rights Commission spelled this technique out in no uncertain terms at a June 1966 Mexican-American meeting in Phoenix. John Binkley, Deputy Director for Field Services of the Commission, said, quote, "The Commission not only sanctions civil disobedience, but encourages it," unquote. He went on to explain, quote, "We respond to pressure. That's why we've done so much for Negroes. We respond to the squeakiest wheel," unquote. And George Roybal, a Binkley associate in the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Office, further endorsed this Great Society morality at the same meeting. Quote, "Nothing ever came about in the civil rights movement by being nice. It takes direct and militant action. I have little patience for diplomats," unquote. What kind of talk is this from government officials? After the disastrous 1965 riots in Watts, the password to the tax till became simply Watts. Despite Los Angeles County spending $500 million a year on welfare, over $5 million a month to the Watts area alone, and despite over $30 million in anti-poverty programs, the cries persist. Unless something is done for the Negro communities, there is no telling what Holocaust will result. The Watts Westminster Neighborhood Association, sponsored by the Presbyterian Church, asked for and got $1 million for a program which not one member of the Los Angeles Anti-Poverty Board, the EYOA, had a chance to read. The highly charged atmosphere in Watts and the threat of further violence brought immediate approval to the program. It was a made-to-order climate for political blackmail, 1 million tax dollars worth. The unelected Los Angeles Anti-Poverty Agency voted to finance with your tax money a supermarket of agencies where offices of all kinds of welfare agencies would be centralized in a 3 or 4 block area in Watts. It was explained at this post-Watts meeting of the Anti-Poverty Agency that most of the unrest in Watts was due to the fact that many Negroes do not know all that is available to them through government welfare programs. This supermarket was described as a place where a woman could go to one office and pick up her Aid to Families with Dependent Children check, then go right next door to a child care center where she could leave her children while she went to still another building to receive pre-vocational training and grooming courses. Another building would house the medical checkup clinics, and eventually they hoped to have a hospital to take care of her illnesses, Social Security, unemployment benefits, general welfare, psychiatric help, child guidance, legal aid, consumer education. U.S. News and World Report recently pointed out that nowadays it pays to be poor. A family of 4 earning an income of $5,000 a year would be much better off not earning it, since they couldn't begin to afford the benefits given to them as unemployed and poverty-stricken. There's a touch of sad humor about the Newton, Massachusetts pupil who sat fascinated in a class where the nation's poverty programs were being explained. Later, at home, a visiting aunt asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. Poor, he replied. Project Head Start is one of the more stylish federal performers in community action. The preschool program has had the largest buildup of any of the poverty programs, with the possible exception of the Job Corps. But the fact remains that many of the same basic ills flourish in this program that abound in all of the other federally controlled programs. Supposedly, this is an educational program, but nowhere is it required to be run by the local or even the state educational authorities. The local school board is not required to have control over what is being taught or by whom. Any community action group can apply to the Office of Economic Opportunity for funds to hire teachers of their choice and conduct a preschool nursery for poverty children. Head Start teachers need only have an Office of Economic Opportunity credential acquired by attending a 2-week training course. In Mississippi, the Head Start program is run by the Civil Rights Headquarters at Mount Beulah. Miles Horton, an avowed socialist and communist sympathizer, and Carl and Ann Braden, both notorious communists, also operate from this office. Teachers and teacher aides seem to be hired on the basis of their participation in the civil rights movement. On the first day of the Mount Beulah Head Start classes, the Clarion Ledger of Jackson, Mississippi, reported that at one center, 6 of the 8 adults present were known COFO and SNCC workers who had participated in demonstrations. 3 of the 6 were known to have had specific trouble with the law. One had been arrested for assault and battery when she hit a Greenwood policeman. Another had been arrested in Jackson the preceding month. The third had listed herself as a pacifist and tax refuser when she was hired. When questioned about such people serving as Head Start teachers, a spokesman said they were well aware of it, and in most cases, such people were the community leaders. It was also discovered at the end of the summer that the Mount Beulah anti-poverty officials had used federal Head Start funds to bail out arrested civil rights workers, squandered $20,000 earmarked for food, and overpaid a New York accounting firm $12,500. With no fear of having to directly face the electorate, economy is seldom a major issue. Some nursery school teachers have reportedly been earning $200 a week for morning work in these daycare centers. In New York, the salaries were reported at $9.50 an hour. In Indiana, teachers were recruited at salaries 25% above those paid in public schools. Head Start has not always been filled with greedy opportunists, but there are too many examples of fraud and twisted motives to dismiss them as isolated cases. Many programs, of course, have been conducted by sincere, if naive, people who are eager to help break the deploring cycle of poverty by working with the very young. Head Start is now a very expensive year-round program. It also has a follow-up program that continues into the regular grades of school. There is much question as to the wisdom of placing the financing and thus the control of educating our children with the federal government. The Job Corps is deemed one of the war's most important undertakings. It is a program in which 16 through 21-year-olds who have dropped out of school, who are unemployed, and who allegedly come from poverty-stricken homes can sign up for a stint in a rural camp and or an urban training center where they live, work, and learn in an atmosphere far from their home community. The cost per year to train each corpsman is somewhere between $9,000 and $12,000, with some camps costing as much as $35,000 per enrollee per year. Compare that with an accepted average annual college cost of $2,500 to $3,000, including food and lodging, books, and personal expenses. Why the exorbitant cost? The staff at some of these camps actually outnumbers the enrollees, and usually is about 1 to every 2 enrollees. The salaries and number of positions are astronomical. Many of the staff are being paid double their previous salaries. The politics and patronage are scandalous. In St. Petersburg, Florida, a hotel was leased for 18 months at $25,000 more than its total appraised value. Representative Albert Quee of Minnesota reported that in Charleston, West Virginia, $225,000 was spent to renovate a hotel appraised at $250,000 and was then leased by the year from the state's leading Democrat for $94,800. In Coxton, Kentucky, a building is being rented for $6,000 a year, while the Democrat owner only paid $6,000 for it less than a year prior. The examples go on, but there are other issues besides cost. In January 1965, people across the nation began voicing their fear of incurring additional community problems by the establishment of these nearby Job Corps camps and the influx of delinquents from Harlem and elsewhere. They were repeatedly assured by top officials that, quote, a screening process has been set up to find those young men and women who, though uneducated and unskilled, have the basic minimum requirements of aptitude, health, and ambition that will enable them to break the bonds of poverty. The Job Corps is neither a sanitarium for incurables nor a correctional institute for incorrigibles, nor is it simply a breadline, unquote. These carefully screened and supervised young adults have been busy proving that if these statements were not ridiculous, then a new definition of incorrigible is in order. Headlines across the nation have continued to describe endless examples of brawling, drinking, knifing, mass sexual assaults, rioting, narcotics, and extortion. Enrollee after enrollee has been found not only to have a serious criminal record, but actually to be on parole at the time of enlistment. It is not a pretty picture, especially when one considers that there seems to be no attempt to separate the hoodlums, agitators, and gang leaders from the innocent, uneducated, and easily misled teenager. But the real shocker is the attitude, explanations, and excuses emanating from Washington. Directives to camp officials read, quote, formal disciplines must be kept at a minimum, unquote. Some camp directors are told to spoil these boys. They've never been spoiled before. Rutgers University was hired to do a thorough study of Camp Kilmer Urban Job Corps Center in New Jersey. While this camp has been described as a sort of Disneyland for the disadvantaged, the Rutgers professors argued that the camp management was interfering with the normal personality problems of the boys. Entrance procedures were described as, quote, a series of degradations, humiliations, and profanations of self, unquote. The professors went on, quote, the corpsman loses his identity equipment, whether it be black leather jackets, long hair, narrow pants, or whatever. These gave the individual a sense of his usual image of himself to others. To be stripped of them, no matter how well intended the stripping, is an egregious action against the corpsman, unquote. There appears to have developed a new standard of rewards. Our best are sent to Vietnam, and the failures are invited to join the Job Corps. The whole war on poverty, with its people's organizations and its power blocks, is recognized by the far left as the perfect vehicle to promote their beliefs. The far left method is simple. Bang away over and over again that the people must revolt against capitalistic oppression. Class distinction is a perfect issue, and the tax-financed organization of the poor under the war on poverty is a perfect vehicle. Police brutality charges and demands for civilian review boards, marches on City Hall, militant human relations commissions, demands for tax-financed jobs for the poor, pressure for the poor to control the multi-billion-dollar poverty program, demonstrations, picketing and threatening, incidents sparking riots, revolution, insurrection. The raucous demands form a pattern which weaves intricately in and out of the war on poverty. The war on poverty, because of its political philosophy, has a large place in any explanation of rioting and insurrection in Watts, Harlem, or any American city, not as a solution, but as a causal factor. When riots result from deliberate fanning of issues into threats of either or else, the taxpayer is told that if he had given more in programs, privileges, and benefits to these rioters, rioting could have been avoided. Further, that if the taxpayer doesn't give more as quickly as possible to the poor, the depressed, and the unemployed, it will happen again. Right now, there are half a dozen cities where riots far worse than those of Watts are being systematically predicted unless the poverty platter in some form or other is passed immediately. And yet for each demand met, 10 more are brought forth. What can we do about it? Plenty. We taxpayers can dust off our common sense, call a spade, and learn to say no to political blackmail. We can throw away our guilt complex, which has so deliberately been thrust upon us by the high-sounding experts. We can reject these false humanitarian nightmares that are legislatively imposed upon us. We can remember that there is no situation so intolerable or no political program so corrupt that it can't be overcome by moral, informed, free Americans who act. One way that you can do your part is by contacting the program chairman to see how you can arrange showings of this film. Knowledge is your most powerful weapon. The showing of this film will multiply your personal effectiveness. We have a magnificent country filled with proud, rugged, hard-working, and giving people. From her inception, America has been waging the most successful war on poverty the world has ever known. It would be tragic to see this real war lost, and all in the name of poverty.